Once we are back, the action begins.
Anybody to be shared, you.
Welcome back. We are here on the Derma Dialogue. We are talking about albinism. Today marks International Albinism Awareness Day. And we want to know albinism. What exactly is albinism? How does it come about? Now, before we get into the discussion, we have some few myths that I want us to break all of them. So we'll start with the first one. So the first myth says people with albinism do not live long. People with albinism do not live long. Now, when it comes to albinism, because there are certain risk or there are certain conditions or challenges that they face, all we need to do is a proper health care. So definitely proper health care, sun protection. Now, once you are doing this, well, you can actually live long. So it is never true that people with albinism do not live long. However, there are certain precautions they need to take. Because of what is happening in their system, they tend to be at risk of especially skin cancer. So once that happens, they need some level of protection. So photo protection, definitely, it's a requirement. So that's the first myth. With proper health care and sun protection, people with albinism, they can live a normal life. The second myth is very interesting. It says albinism is contagious. So what it means is, if I have a friend, or if people with living with albinism, or people with this, what this myth means is, if I get close to the person, I'm also going to become an albino. I'm also going to acquire it just by contact. And this is false. So albinism, it cannot be spread through touch or even sharing of food or generally social interactions. albinism is not contagious. If you have a friend who has it, you can do, I mean, in terms of coming into contact with such a person, you don't have any, or you don't get any gene, or you don't inherit any gene just by coming into contact with a person. We are going to go into further detail, talking about how it comes about. Probably it's going to make more sense. The third myth says people with albinism cannot succeed academically. It is also false. In fact, it had nothing to do with intelligence. When it comes to albinism, it only affects pigment. So it affects pigmentation, but not intelligence. The next myth, it says people with albinism should not marry. And that's also a very interesting one. There are times when people even say, or some people refer to our albinos as, in terms of even them, there's nothing like somebody with albinism even dying, or even we burying people with albinism. So these are all myths. In fact, people with albinism can marry, they can work, they can raise families like anyone or everyone else. Albinism only affects pigment. It doesn't affect anything else. So you can function normally, just that because of the pigment or because of its effect on pigment, there are certain precautions that needs to be taken, and that's all. Then the last myth, it says albinism only affects the skin. Albinism only affects the skin. So when it comes to albinism, it doesn't only affect the skin. It also affects the eye. Very important. So it commonly affects your vision and can affect especially the psychological part. So the psychological well-being is also affected. Now, as I said, today marks International Albinism Awareness Day. And we are here talking about albinism. We want to know more about albinism. We want to know why albinism requires certain precautions. Now, many myths and misconceptions about albinism still exist. Well, today we discuss the science, the stigma, and how society can do better. Albinism is one of the most misunderstood genetic conditions, especially in Africa. It is important to understand that people with albinism are not different in intelligence, they're not different in abilities, or even in work. The only difference is the amount of melanin, so pigment, melanin their body produce. And it's very important. We are going to take our time, explain how it comes about, why they need certain precautions, and the skin, manifestation, or even the impact on the eyes, the skin generally, or even cancers that are associated with albinism. This is the Derma Dialogue on Zed 101.9 FM. We will do a quick commercial break. When we are back, we are going to go into more detail when it comes to albinism. Stay tuned. we are discussing albinism in general. Now, what is albinism? When we say albinism, it's actually a group of inherited genetic conditions which is characterized by reduced or absent melanin production. So the definition is very important. One, there could be reduced melanin production, and secondly, it can also be, total absent of melanin production. So people with albinism, two things: either there is a reduction in their melanin production or in melanin, or it's not there at all, so absent of it. Now, for us to understand this, we need to talk about, first of all, melanin. What exactly melanin does. So melanin is responsible for our skin color. That is the reason why we have, or we look, or our skin looks like this. Melanin is also the reason for our hair color, then our eye color. So protection against harmful UV light rays definitely is by melanin. And that's the reason why melanin is very important. That's the reason why skin of color, we tend to, we have certain or some level of protection when it comes to UV light. Now, without sufficient melanin, individuals develop very light skin and even hair, and often experience visual problems. Now, globally, about 1 in 17,000, even to 20,000 of people, they have albinism. So in parts of Africa, for instance, including Ghana, it is more common due to the genetic patterns within our populations. Now, why does albinism occur? So this is very important. Why do we even know what leads to albinism? Now, many people still blame one parent. So some say, well, I might have inherited from my mom. Others say, maybe it's not from my mom, it's actually from my dad. But the truth is, we say albinism is generally or usually inherited in an autosomal recessive pattern. Now, this means both parents carry the gene. So anytime you hear albinism, it is never one-sided. It's never the mother alone or the father alone. Both parents carry the gene. So what it means is both parents, usually they have a normal skin. And that's very important. When it comes to albinism, both parents usually have normal skin. Neither parent is at fault. And that's what we need to stress. It is simply genetics. Albinism is not caused by curses, as people say, or sometimes even sense, witchcraft, or anything a parent did during pregnancy. It has absolutely nothing to do with this. Albinism is simply or generally genetics. Now, let's talk about the skin challenges of albinism. So if I have a reduction or if I have a reduced melanin, or even if I don't have melanin at all, what is its impact on my skin? Now, melanin acts like our natural sunscreen. So without it, sunburn occurs easily. Your skin ages faster, and skin cancers also develop more frequently at younger age. So, unfortunately, skin cancer remains a major cause of illness and death amongst Africans with albinism. And that's the main reason why certain precautions needs to be taken. We are going to go through a very practical advice when it comes to people living with albinism, how to protect, so photo protection in general. One is daily sunscreen use. This is very important. Albinism, we need daily sunscreen use. So the whole idea is to reduce we coming into contact with the UV light. The same way we can do our protective clothing. And sometimes, especially depending on where you live, once you are in Africa, we prefer you do these, long or wide brimmed hats, which is very, very important. The whole idea is to act as a shade or to prevent them from coming into contact with the UV light. Then we need regular skin examination. In fact, one of the important things that we need to do, just as we do when it comes to people with mole, just as we do mole mapping, people living with albinism, we should constantly examine their skin. And the whole idea is, in case we are having a new skin lesion, something that wasn't there before, there are times when there's a need to do a skin biopsy. So people living with albinism, constantly, we need to put them on surveillance. We need to check their skin. Very important. Because many skin cancers, they can be prevented if detected early. Now, let's talk about the eye problems many people don't know about. I get this question a lot. Does albinism affect vision? Yes, almost always. Many people with albinism, they experience reduced vision. And their eyes are very sensitive to bright light. Sometimes we say they are, when it comes to photophobia, or they are photophobic. And sometimes they have involuntary eye movement as well. And again, difficulty seeing distant objects. So these are the problems or the challenges when it comes to people living with albinism, when it comes to their eye. To their eye, first of all, they have reduced vision, and their eyes are very sensitive to bright light, and sometimes involuntary eye movement, and difficulty seeing distant objects. Now, importantly, these visual problems, they are not caused by laziness or lack of intelligence. No, not at all. And sometimes you hear or you see people, especially when it comes to this photo protection. Now, children with albinism often need classroom support and sometimes vision aids. And these are very practical ways we can do to help. Now, when it comes to albinism, the psychological impact is something that constantly is under threat. We need to do more when it comes to the psychological part of it. In our part of the world, stigma when it comes to or with regards to albinism, well, it's real. In the past, there has been some documentaries about albinism. about people, using or for using our people with albinism for rituals in the past. So the psychological impact is very important. Let's talk about the emotional challenges that individuals with albinism will typically face. Now, the psychological burden is often underestimated because many experience, especially in schools, so bullying in school, name calling, social exclusion, these are real scenarios. And because of that, there's always low self confidence. Then it follows. It triggers anxiety, depression. So these are psychological burden that are often underestimated. In fact, some even avoid social gathering. Some avoid social events because they fear, they are going to be being stared at or even being mocked at, especially children. So you notice, so children are they are more vulnerable because repeated negative comments can affect their self-esteem for years. And this comes back to a very important question. So as parents, what should we do? Now, parents should build confidence early in their kids. People living with albinism, they need that very early. Again, we need to encourage these kids, encourage participation in school and social activities. In fact, in other part of the world, certain professions, modeling, they tend to pay people with albinism even more than people without albinism or people with the normal skin color, if I should put it that way. So these are very important. These are things or these are measures that once we put in place, not only are we putting things putting money in your pockets or economically helping out, psychologically we are also empowering them, and that's very important. So definitely, as parents, we need to encourage participation in school activities. Now, we need to correct misinformation whenever it arises. Emotional support is very important when it comes to kids living with albinism or kids with albinism. So we need to seek emotional support when needed. Now, in Africa, in Ghana, there are some cultural beliefs and stigma. It tends to be more pronounced in Africa. So the question now is, why is stigma still common? It's been years, unfortunately, in Africa or in our part of the world, the stigma, it's still deepened. And the reason is many harmful beliefs, they have persisted across generations. For instance, some people falsely believe albinism is a curse. People with albinism, some people believe they have some supernatural powers. Others believe they are bad omen. And their body parts, some believe it brings wealth or even luck. Now, these beliefs, they are completely false and dangerous. And that's the reason why stigma is still common. Such myths, they have contributed to discrimination and in some African countries, even violence against people with albinism. Now, the key message is albinism is a genetic condition, is not a spiritual condition. As we mentioned earlier, it has nothing to do with where you come from. It's pure genetics. And that's what we need to talk about. We need more awareness creation with regards to albinism, especially cultural influences. Now, what can society do? Well, do better, or how can the society also help? Because we spoke about how parents can help. Definitely, society can also help. Or how can the society support people living with albinism? Now, society must stop discriminatory language. We need to educate children early. Very important. Kids at the age of sometimes as early as 3 to 4 years, they become more aware of how they look. So definitely, we need to educate children early. Now, a very important part, and this goes beyond us. We need some level of commitment. Because of what we spoke earlier, photo protection. So we need to ensure access to sunscreen. Again, we need to promote equal educational opportunities. People living with albinism should not, I repeat, people living with albinism, they shouldn't enjoy some courtesies. They shouldn't be left out. In fact, we should rather push them. As I said earlier, in elsewhere, certain professions like modeling, people with albinism, they're even paid more than people without albinism. So these are some of the things that society can do to help. Again, we need to encourage routine skin and eye care. And especially with the myth, we need to challenge myths whenever we hear them. Because the inclusion starts with everyday actions. These are the things that a society can do to help or to empower people living with albinism. Now, if you just tuned in, this is a Derma Dialogue on Zed 101.9 FM. And today is a special edition. Today is International Albinism Awareness Day. And we are talking about albinism. Back then, we used to say, or we used to call them albinos. But now we don't use albinos. We say people living with albinism. And that's what we've been talking about. You can share your experience. If you know anyone living with albinism, you can also get in touch with us. We have free sunscreens from Rudem, Ghana, to be given to people living with albinism. So if you are living with albinism, or if you know anyone living with albinism, let the person get in touch with us for a free sunscreen. Photo protection, as we said earlier, is very important when it comes to people living with albinism because of the risk of skin cancer. So, if you just joined us, we have been discussing albinism. Now, albinism is not a curse. It's not punishment. It's not some sort of mystery. No. Albinism, as we said earlier, is genetics, pure genetics. It is a genetic condition, and people living with albinism, they deserve the same dignity, opportunities, even healthcare, and also respect as everyone else. It's just certain precautions that needs to be taken because of their lack of, or the reduction in their melanin, and precautions, as we mentioned earlier. Photo protection, very important. Now, we also spoke about the eyes, some of the challenges when it comes to the eye, involuntary eye movement and stuff. Now, on this International Albinism Awareness Day, I want us to replace myth with fact. We can also replace stigma with acceptance. And also fear with now understanding. Albinism, there's nothing they can do in terms of intelligence. Yes, they can't do anything, all the things that people without albinism does. And today we are empowering the society. We are telling people that people with albinism, they can live a normal life. However, there are certain precautions that needs to be taken. That's all. And again, photo protection. That's the first one. Secondly, we should always examine their skin. And what are we looking for? Do we have any skin lesions? Do we have any rash? Or do we have anything on our skin that we've noticed is getting bigger? It's now become ulcerated. So these are the things we need to look out for. Anytime we are examining or we are going through these surveillance or these examination, these are the things that we need to look out for. Now, I want us to scale this conversation to the national level. In terms of policies, in terms of social interventions or even economical interventions, what can we do to help people living with albinism? Especially when when they find themselves in areas where they are completely or they are often misunderstood. In the national level, what can government do to protect people with albinism? Pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, or cosmeceuticals in general. Is there anything that we can do, especially with the photo protection they need? Is there any special creams or should we do creams that contains or that has SPF or sun protection factor? What can we do to reduce this burden? The burden of having to do a regular photo protection. And in terms of awareness creation, what are we also doing as doctors? So these are things that we can do to empower people living with albinism. They have a society here in Ghana, very active one. Very proactive president. So I'm using this medium to ask for support. Support in terms of sunscreens, support in terms of screening, free derma screening for people living with albinism. Now, what are some of the challenges you want to hear or want to know? Do you know anyone living with albinism? You can share your childhood experience. The first time you saw it, the first time you saw someone with albinism, how you felt. Have you thought of this? Even you giving birth to someone with albinism? So these are things that we want to hear from you. We will do a quick break. When we come back, we want to hear from you. We have received some questions. We are going to talk about it. But feel free, let us know your experiences. Let us know what you think we can also do more. Let us also know where we are lacking or what you think we can add on. This is the Derma Dialogue on Zed 101.9. We'll do a quick break. When we're back, albinism conversation continues. Very interesting questions. We'll start with Gideon. So Gideon says, "Good evening, doctor. I'm an albino. So I'm okay. I'm an albino, but please, what precautions should I take when spending time outdoors, especially in a sunny climate like Accra?" And he follows up to say, "And can you advise on how to manage any skin conditions that are more common in people with albinism? Thank God we are in the raining season." So, thanks so much, Gideon. So, first of all, Gideon, you are not an albino. You are living with albinism. Mm. And I'm going to share with you some precautions, even though we did that earlier. So, the main important thing is photo protection. Anytime we talk about albinism, the skin is very important, the eyes also very important. So photo protection, definitely. So yes, fortunately in our part of the world, the sun. So what we need is either we are using a sunscreen. In fact, Gideon, get in touch with us. I'm giving you a free Rudem sunscreen. Free Rudem sunscreen. So get in touch with us. So your sunscreen very important. Secondly, you see those wide brimmed hats. The whole idea is anything that protects you from the UV light. So this is very important. Or there are times when you can have a moisturizer that has some sun protection factor in there. Now, your eyes. We need to constantly, or we need to be checking your eyes. You need to visit the clinic. When it comes to skin conditions, what we are worried about is skin cancer. So there are cancers that are very common in people living with albinism or people with albinism. Squamous cell carcinoma, all these, the most important risk factor is the sun, especially when we have no or reduced melanin. So otherwise, other skin conditions are managed just as people without albinism. Now, Sophia is asking, why is International Albinism Awareness Day important for raising global awareness? And what are some common misconceptions about people with albinism? So we spoke about this earlier, but we'll just do a recap. So first of all, we still have challenges when it comes to people accepting or people's conception with regards to albinism. So we can't put aside or we can't deny the cultural effect. Up till now, some people still believe that albinism is a curse. Others do think albinism it's some or you can easily get it by even coming into contact with someone with albinism. So days like this, we are supposed to educate. We are supposed to create more awareness. Tell people about what it is and empower people living with albinism. It's just genetics. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It doesn't affect how they think. It doesn't affect or it doesn't make them less. Again, days like this, we need to lobby. National level, policies, especially when it comes to our national health insurance scheme, for instance. Some level of, or some free or some support for people with albinism. especially when they need frequent dermatological consult. So national level, definitely policies that are going to protect people living with albinism. Now, when it comes to our, local pharmaceutical companies or pharmacies and or cosmeceuticals and stuff, days like this, we can give, apart from the education and the awareness creation, sunscreens. We can share sunscreens. And over here in Ghana, we have a very vibrant president when it comes to people living with albinism in Ghana. Very proactive. So we can liaise with him and at least give free sunscreens. And in terms of even workplaces, if possible, just as we are doing, we are trying to have the same or equal, sex when it comes to male and female dominations or male and female proportions at work at our workplaces. We can also create a certain quota for people living with or people with albinism. So these are some of the things that we can do to create more awareness and also to empower people living with or people with albinism. Now Naya is asking, so what role can government? Well, I spoke earlier, but Naya is very important. She's asking what role government can play. So as I said, in terms of protecting, so Naya is focusing on protection of their rights. So there are certain laws, especially criminal, especially when as long as people still believe or people still think look less and think albinism is a curse, and some of them sometimes the treatment that they go through. So definitely policies should be enforced. And definitely there should also be a balance, especially how we see our cultural values. Now, Aguinea is asking, so how can media and social platforms contribute to positive representation of people with albinism? Now, just as we are doing, in fact, International Albinism Awareness Day, it shouldn't be the only times that we talk publicly or that we increase this awareness. As I said earlier, we have a very vibrant people living with albinism. They are president. The society is very active. So the media, for instance, years back, there was some documentary that highlighted or that brought the fact that some people living with or people with albinism were being used for rituals and other stuff. So as powerful as our media is, there's a platform or there's a way of empowering people with albinism and also, if possible, fight or get support, put pressure on the system to support people with albinism. Now, Mefia is also asking, how can schools create an inclusive environment for students with albinism? I once had an albino friend in class and every day was something else. So, these are real experiences. These are things that we've all one way or the other, seen or witnessed before. Schools, very important. So schools are supposed to create that atmosphere where as early as, because I said, kids they become aware of themselves, especially how they look at a very early age. So as early as from kindergarten or even KG of class 1, we need to empower them. Because discrimination starts at this level. So definitely schools are supposed to create that atmosphere that sort of protect and even support people with albinism. Then again, now is asking, so how does albinism affect the health, the vision, the skin of the individual? So with regards to albinism, what we are scared about is skin cancer. And that's the reason why we push for the photoprotection. In fact, a very common one is what we call SCC, squamous cell carcinoma. You can also have BCC, basal cell carcinoma as well. But what we are worried about is skin cancer. And that's the reason why we encourage people with albinism very regular. They need to check whether there is any new lesions on their skin, especially their scalp. Then, the last question. So, how can communities promote acceptance and inclusion of individuals with albinism? And what challenges do people with albinism face in education and employment? Yes, I'll start with the second question. 2 years ago, I had a patient who had or was living with albinism. He shared a very sad story where, due to around COVID time, most of these the interviews it wasn't in person. So unfortunately, I don't know what happened to him, but during his interview, he was never seen, or it was, even though it was a virtual, interview. Unfortunately, there was something wrong with his camera. So everything he did very well, only for him to now physically appear. And the moment they saw that he's living with albinism, then all sort of things. So this is a real life experience, discrimination. So eventually, he initially they said he had he had gotten the job. Eventually, he had to come off it. And there are times when they make the environment unsuitable for you. So these are the things that we are talking about. So these are real life experiences when it comes to what people with albinism go through. So, unfortunately, this is where we draw the curtains on the Derma Dialogue. We have been discussing albinism. We have been talking about especially what the myth, very important, what they have to go through, and some skin conditions that are very common in people living with or people with albinism. It has been a Derma Dialogue, and I'll leave you with this. The color of a person The color of a person's skin should never determine the value of their life. The color of a person's skin should never determine the value of their life. So happy International Albinism Awareness Day, and I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for joining us. Next is Reggae Cafe. Don't go nowhere.
You are tuned in to Zed 101.